Hello and welcome to Take Me Through Your Day. We have a very special guest. This is the former mayor of Pittsburgh, Bill Peduto. I'm not going to waste a lot of time with the intro because it's Bill Peduto. He doesn't need much of an intro. So ladies and gentlemen, Bill Peduto. All right, so normally I'd start with asking what you do for a living, but we're basically talking about what you did for a living. So let's start with that. Tell me how many years you got involved with that, and then we'll start from the beginning.
Well, I started out as a paper boy. So
Well, no, we're going to get back to that. But
okay. Yeah.
because you're the mayor.
Exactly. My last job was the 60th mayor of the city of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And I had the opportunity to take a city that was going through a major transition. A city that had been at the top of the heap when it came to the Industrial Revolution. And during the 70s, when I was growing up, it was the third largest corporate center in America. And then it died. And my term as the mayor was the return of Pittsburgh to the global stage. It was a full 30-year transition of an economic depression followed by a recession where our biggest export was no longer steel, but our young people.
Yeah.
And during the past decade, we saw a very significant change to Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And how long were you mayor specifically?
I was the mayor for 8 years, 2 4-year terms. I ran a third term and I lost. There have only been 3 mayors who've ever been elected 3 times or more, 4 times. It was going to be an uphill battle, but it was also a transition that we were seeing across the country ever since the murder of George Floyd and a strong call for social justice. I like to think in a way that the work that I did in 30 years of city government helped to pave a way for Pittsburgh to have its first black mayor. So I've never looked back with any sort of regret or any type of sadness about not getting that third term.
Yeah. So let's go back to you being a paper boy. Let's start there. Are you from Pittsburgh originally?
Well, no, I'm from a far-off land called Scott Township that's 2 miles from the city's border.
Yeah,
or less.
That's not too far.
Yeah, but I was the first mayor in like almost 100 years who wasn't born in the borders of the city of Pittsburgh, which is kind of remarkable.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so I grew up in Scott, and I was the youngest of 4 boys, a very conservative, traditional Roman Catholic Italian family.
Yeah.
Best way I could describe it. And yeah, I began delivering papers at the age of 8, second grade.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Child labor laws were lax.
I was just saying, you got me beat. I tell people I started working at 12, and they're like, what? It's like, you got it.
So
8 years old.
I had that route for 10 years, and I was able to save up a significant amount of money and do a lot of things that my family probably wouldn't have been able to do. But it was the first job, and it really set a tone in me about a work ethic.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that's rough work. I've heard other people talk about it.
It's every day. Yeah, 7 days a week.
It's a lot, and it's early.
Well, I had the afternoon. I had the Pittsburgh Press. So I had after school, and I had to adjust because I was also very active from the time I was 8 until 58. So, but I had support from family and support from friends to be able to make that happen.
Well, that's good. So let's cut to about the high school age. Did you have any idea what you wanted to do with your life?
Yeah, according to one of my best friends, we used to play hockey for Chartreuse Valley, and our practices would be like starting at midnight and going to like 1:30 in the morning on a Saturday. And
Really?
Yeah, and by our senior year, we would decide that was the beginning of the night. But we were up on Mount Washington one of those nights at like 2 in the morning, and I told him one day I'm going to be the mayor of this town. So there must have been some inclination back then. I always was fascinated by history. My dad was a history school teacher who then became a salesman because I was born. and they needed more money.
Yeah.
And then at the end of his life, he went back to subbing history. He loved history, and he instilled it in me. And so I wanted to do something along those lines, but I didn't know what it was. I think I thought about becoming a lawyer for about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I didn't really know there were fields like urban studies. I didn't understand that there were, civil engineering and architecture that actually deal with cities. And to be honest, I really didn't really understand the importance of cities and government. I looked at everything as Washington at that age of my life.
Yeah.
So I was trying to just figure out my niche and being able to study political science, which was the only field that I knew of. And so I was accepted to Carnegie Mellon University.
Well, hang on. Let's go back for a second. What planted the seed of I would like to be mayor?
Oh, I think it became part of my growing up. So every Sunday we'd have that traditional Italian dinner, and we would be gathered around the table. And then after dinner, all the women went in the kitchen and all the men hung around the table, and they would talk about politics and government, even though they knew nothing about it. There's nobody in my family who was ever involved in politics or in government. The closest it came is my Uncle Marino was a state trooper, and my brother served as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. Nobody got a government check. We never had a yard sign.
Yeah.
So if it came from anything, it probably came from watching those folks and being the youngest at the table and wondering, how do they know? Second part of it is when I was delivering those papers, I wasn't only reading the comic section, I was reading the whole paper.
Yeah.
And this was from a very early age. And I became fascinated. You have to realize, we were in Vietnam when I was growing up, and I remember when we pulled out. Watergate was a very instrumental part of my second grade to third grade. It just seemed that there was a lot of things that were happening at the time. And early on in life, I wanted to be the first astronaut baseball player. In my ninth grade, I couldn't hit a curveball, and I did horrible in science. So my fallback, I think, was always to go into politics.
No, there you go. All right, so now we can get into, you got into Carnegie Mellon?
Yeah, I got accepted to Carnegie Mellon, study political science. I received a offer of a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship. And over the course of the next 2 years, I proceeded to basically lose both. It's a part of life that when you're going through it, it's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's a part of life that for the next 20 years, you're embarrassed to even tell anybody. It's a part of life that I probably learned the greatest lessons about myself and probably the greatest learning experiences that I have to this date. I was not sure what I wanted to do, and I didn't know the path to get there. And I was flailing at school, even though I was always a decent student. I wasn't a great student, but I was just not putting any effort in. So I went to Penn State. I changed majors, I think, a total of 7 times during my illustrious college career, which basically was completed in 6 terms. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush. But it was, it took me a while before. I left school with 3 courses left. I had the 1 course completed that summer. I had 2 others that I waited 20 years to complete.
Okay. So where do we go from there? What's
So I'm at Penn State, and
give me a timeline.
So we're looking at I graduated high school in '83, and I'm at CMU '84, '85. I'm at Penn State '80s. I guess we split '86, '87, '88, and then '89. I'm there I'm leaving. That's it. I still have those 3 courses, but I'm not coming back. I'll just finish them this summer and be done with it. And like I said, I only did 1. By the way, we're in a park. So.
Oh, yeah. People know this podcast has a lot of dogs on it.
Yeah. That whimpering, it's not a dog being tortured. It's just a dog seeing other dogs and wanting to play. But so during that time frame, I did one thing that was very good, and that is I interned.
Okay.
And I took an internship working at the county coroner's office. And this would have been in the summer of '86.
All right.
And I was working every morning, getting up bright and early, going down to the coroner's office, and then driving back to my parents' home, changing, and going to work at a French restaurant and bussing tables until about 10 or 11 at night, sleeping for 6 to 7 hours, going back to the coroner's office. And I was doing it to make money. You know, I had 2 jobs in order to make money to go back to school. But what I didn't realize is that gave me the opportunity, because I was doing press calls, to apply the next summer to be an intern on Capitol Hill.
All right.
And because I had the experience on dealing with the media from the coroner's office, I was given the opportunity to be an intern as a deputy press secretary for a member of Congress.
Oh, okay. That's a big jump.
Yeah, which basically was a big jump, but at the same time, it was something that I wouldn't have had, or possibly never have gotten even the opportunity to be on the Hill, had I not done that job working for the coroner's office. I wasn't thinking it at the time. It led to that. And then I volunteered a lot on political campaigns. And I put in my time on them. I got to learn. I talked to people. I asked questions. I worked hard. Even though I wasn't working hard in college, I was working hard at these internships. And so when I got out of school, I was able to land a paid job with the Supreme Court race for Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And I was paid a total of $100 a week to do everything from fixing the copier when it jammed to delivering yard signs out to Lawrence County.
Well, let me stop you right there. Let's go back to when you were volunteering.
Yeah.
What exactly were you doing? Because I've interviewed some other political people about what their jobs were there, and it essentially was making phone calls.
Yeah.
Is that
that
what?
was all stuffing envelopes back then. I mean,
Stuffing
we
envelopes.
would send actual letters, and you have to stuff them, or putting stamps on postcards, or going door to door, doing all those different things that you do as a volunteer. But at the same time, you're with a network. You're with a network, people going and working their way up the ladder, and you're also with a network of people who are already there but are young, and who will talk to a young person about the opportunities to break into the biz.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I was doing was not just making phone calls. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was networking.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. It's the nuts and bolts of the little parts of climbing up the ladder.
Yep.
So, all right. So
The campaign for Supreme Court.
yes, there we go.
So $100 a week, just whatever anybody needs on staff, do it. And I brought something to that campaign that had never been brought to a Democratic campaign in Western Pennsylvania.
What's that?
A computer.
Oh, okay.
1989.
Mm-hmm.
Osborne OS2, obsolete, 2 dual floppy drive system. It was a laptop that was the size of a large suitcase.
Yeah.
And I started to put together the databases of committee people. I started to put together the databases of our active volunteers. And I started presenting reports to the campaign. And by the end of that campaign, I was the statewide field director.
All right.
And it, again, is a progression of that volunteering and doing the other things to being able to take a job for $100 a week. And fortunately being in a position where I could take a job for $100 a week, and then being able to work my ass off to be able to prove to people that I could do more.
Yeah. All right. So what's the next move from there?
So we win. First campaign ever to spend, judicial race in the state's history, to spend $1 million. And the people who were running that campaign were also running a campaign for Sophie Masloff for mayor.
Okay.
And so I was hired to work in the finance department of the Masloff administration in 1990.
Any particular reason they put you in finance?
Because that's where a job was available.
Okay, that works.
Yeah. So I spent a year working in finance, working on just some projects. And when tax time came, I was the person that if you called about a problem, I was trying to figure out what the problem was and to help you.
Yeah.
There wasn't a long-term position, though, to stay with city government. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to really work in city government. In fact, even the building seemed depressing to me, the county building. It's just the dinge of the fluorescent light,
The fluorescent light, and it's all that tan.
Or that aquatic green.
Yeah, or aquatic.
Institutional
Very institutional.
Yeah. Yeah, so I ended up leaving the city and going down to D.C. I had a brother who was in the Army, and he was stationed at Fort Detrick, so I stayed with him and his family until he was deployed to the Middle East for the Gulf War. And I had another brother who was at home with my parents. He lived in New York, and he was diagnosed with AIDS. And it was the hardest part of my life. But again, like the hard part when I was in college, and this was just after it gave me my bearings for later in life, so that no matter what would happen in my job as mayor, I could always look back and say, do you remember that year of 1990 and 1991 when Dave was having scuds fall on his head and we would have to wait 48 hours to find out if he was alive?
Yeah.
And Tom was suffering and slowly dying of a horrible, horrible disease. And so when the Teamsters are demanding a renegotiation of the contract, it's not as hard to be able to say, okay, let's sit down and talk.
Yeah.
Again, it's through those valleys of life that you learn who you are and which build you and prepare you for what may come later.
Yeah.
So that takes me to 91, and I landed a job, 90, I'm sorry. I landed a job inside the Beltway, and it's working for this company called Metropole. And our saying was, you know where your constituents live, we know where they stand. And it was a subsidiary of R.R. Donnelley that used 53 different demographics. Do you have kids? Do your kids go to private school? What magazines do you read? We put it to an entire database of voter results across the entire country. There were 33 of us from all over the U.S., Democrats and Republicans, that worked to build this company. And in preparation for the 92 presidential race, a soft money PAC called Lawyers for the Republic bought our company.
Okay.
They didn't buy our data. They bought our company so that only they would have this information. It was the first national database that went this deep. So we were all offered a job at the home headquarters in Lincoln, Nebraska. And of the 33 young people who were working inside the Beltway, not one took it. I came back home on the day that my brother passed away. I got the call that morning, and then I got a second call from a political consultant who said, I need you to come back to Pittsburgh. There's a race for city controller, and we need somebody with campaign experience who can run it. He's running as an independent against a Democrat, but we really need you to be there. And I always felt that call was my brother letting me know that everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
So I came back home and I ran a campaign for city controller. And at the same time, I kept my address in D.C. and started a consulting firm that basically learned from what we did at Metropole. How do you micro-target and not just send a direct mail piece out to an entire electorate, but micro-target and find a specific audience and be able to break that message into different messages.
Yeah. I mean,
that
makes sense.
That was not being done. Back then, you would go to Allegheny County and you would ask for the super voter list, and it would give you all the names of the people that vote in every primary election. And you would send the same message out to people whose political views were quite different. And again, this isn't something I studied in school. This isn't something I even knew existed because it didn't exist. This was really in the first iteration of massaging massive databases.
Yeah, it feels like common sense now, but back then, like,
This was cutting edge.
yeah.
So it was called Allegheny Political Resources, and I ran it for several years. I basically was running campaigns. I was advising on fundraising. I was advising on field. I was providing targeted data. I was doing whatever any Democrat in Western Pennsylvania needed. And I had the opportunity by the time I was 28 to also be the Western political director for the lieutenant governor at the time, Mark Single.
Yeah.
So I had rebounded pretty well. I was making good money, but I had to move. Like I lived in Du Bois for 6 months, and in Farrell, PA for 13 months, and in Mill Creek and in Somerset, and I lived all throughout Western Pennsylvania. And by the time I turned 30, I was in a television studio in Youngstown, Ohio, working against it was an open seat at the time, but a guy named Phil English, who would end up being the congressman. We'd lose the race, but we were cutting a TV ad, and it was, just hard negative. And I realized I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. And this isn't what I wanted to do when I was in school, thinking I wanted to do something in government. So I ended up taking a pay cut of 1/2, moving back to Pittsburgh, and becoming the chief of staff to a city councilman.
All right. What city council?
Dan Cohen.
Okay.
He represented.
See, we typically don't name drop on this show, but
Well, Dan represented the district I lived in, which at the time was Shady Side, East Liberty, Bloomfield, Oakland, West Oakland, Squirrel Hill, Point Breeze. And you have to remember, this is 1996, and we're at the throes of the Depression. I mean, we're not into recession yet. There's nothing that's happening here. There's no new businesses moving in. The only thing that's moving in is lower and lower population numbers. I mean, it's just at a very, very difficult time in Pittsburgh's history. And I didn't know the first thing about city government, although I thought I did. But if you asked me what's the difference between zoning and planning, I wouldn't have been able to tell you, or how infrastructure is financed and what the importance of a bond rating is. So I took the job, and I basically apprenticed for 7 years. I had the opportunity to be at every community meeting.
You apprenticed for 7 years?
Yeah.
Is that a typical thing?
No.
Okay.
No, but I learned everything that I possibly could learn, not only about Pittsburgh and about city government, but about what the cutting edge types of technology were coming, and what cities were already engaging in it. The practices that back then we would call sprawl and decline, where an area like this, even though we were losing population, we were building whole new communities and new roadways and new infrastructure, and then asking, why are my taxes going up?
Yeah.
The issues of good governance, and then beginning to network as a staff member with national organizations, and really getting this opportunity to see where Pittsburgh could go. So before I ever announced running for public office, I had a very, very good sense of where we were and why we were there, and what it would take in order to be able to start to see things change.
Well, I imagine that's a very important thing if you're going to take on that kind of task.
And I had the years of experience of working with top-level political consultants on dealing with the other side of it, which politics is how you actually get things done. And knowing when the gloves come off, and knowing when never to even consider it.
Yeah. All right. So at this point, you run, and how does that start?
Well, it starts in around September, October, with a boss who comes up and says, you know what? I haven't made my mind up yet, but I don't think I'm going to run for another term. And you should really consider it. I think that you would make a good council member.
So this was basically offered up to you.
It wasn't, though. It was, if I don't run, you should do it. But I'm just telling you.
Considering not running.
Right. And so I really didn't think about it. I figured, the skeletons in my closet from college, I've always been the person to be behind the lens, not in front of the lens. I was, sort of geared my career around being a consultant to advise elected candidates and then elected officers.
Yeah.
So I gave it a thought between then and the end of the year, and that's when he came to me at the end of the year and said, I've decided I'm not going to run. Have you made up your mind? And I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I just said to myself, and I told reporters too, I said, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to vote the right way on every issue, screw the politics, and I'll probably only serve one term, but I really want to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I ran. It was a crowded field. I got about 50% of the vote, just from all the work that I had done those 7 years of being at every community meeting, getting to know people who lived on every single street in the district. And I went into city council as one of the youngest members. Council was very different back then. It was very conservative.
Yeah.
Majority of council did not support and would never attend any of the pride parades. Many of the council members did not support a women's right to choose, even though they're all Democrats. Most of council was pro-NRA or at least pro-gun. It was a different makeup of council that only got more progressive, only got more conservative over the next couple of years.
What year?
So we're looking at 2001.
Okay.
And
all right.
looking at 2001 up to like 2005.
Okay.
And you're seeing the last part of the Murphy administration during my first term.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the third term for Murphy. And then in 2005, Bob O'Connor would be elected. I ran for mayor and I ran for council.
Yeah.
So we had really interesting mail pieces and handouts that would say, don't think twice, just vote twice. And it would have the picture of me and then the exact same picture of me saying, vote Peduto, vote Peduto. So we sort of made fun of it within the council district, but people understood that I was early into my career. I was the only person who called for this city to go under state receivership under Act 47. I got blasted for it. It finally passed, and we finally did it.
What is that a little bit? Can you explain that?
The city had, during the Depression and Recession, basically gone bankrupt.
Yeah.
We didn't have a tax base, and if we tried to raise taxes in order to pay the bills, we would have driven everyone out of this city.
Yeah.
And so what we ended up doing was borrowing money. We basically sold our water department and created an authority with it just in order to be able to pay the bills for the 2 years. And we had run out of options. There was nothing left to get rid of. And so the mayor wanted Harrisburg to allow us to have new taxes. Harrisburg had made it abundantly clear they were not going to take that vote, let alone pass that vote. And we were in a corner. And the only way that we could really bounce back is sort of what Philadelphia did. When Philadelphia under Mayor Rendell, then it was a complete restructuring. So there was a opportunity under an act created in the 80s called Act 47 to allow for restructuring, but it was going to be painful. It was going to mean that a lot of people were going to lose their jobs. It was going to mean that there would be tax restructuring, but it was going to increase taxes. It meant that there was going to be losses of pools and rec centers and fire stations. And so nobody supported that, but it was the only way to save Pittsburgh.
All right.
So I worked hard to get that done, and that was during that first term, and that's why people would support me. They saw somebody who was a progressive voice on council, but fiscally responsible.
Yeah.
And it was a niche that I had earned and made and would add a couple other things to over the years. So 2005, all the pundits said, I'm going to lose my seat. And there was a well-financed, highly endorsed candidate, an attorney, well-known in the district, running against me. And I was running against, I think there were 5 of us in the race for mayor, including Bob O'Connor and Michael Lamb. And they said I was going to end up finishing 3rd or 4th and losing my council seat. And it's because I want to fly too close to the sun.
Yeah.
I ended up finishing 2nd for mayor in what most people saw as an upset. And I ended up winning 38 out of my 41 districts in my council seat. And I was in a position where things looked good for the future. We had begun at that point the second progressive movement in the city. The first movement happened back in 1908, and it led to both government reform and social reform within the city. We were putting together a coalition of environmentalists, faith-based leaders, unions, community leaders, in order to be able to get people like Bruce Krause elected and Natalia Rudiak, Patrick Dowd, Daniel Lavelle, school board member, State Representative Aaron Mulchaney, where each of these groups would work together. But we were also working not just on the political side, but on the government side. We passed the second Clean Air Act in the city's history. We passed the first Clean Water Act. We passed prevailing wage legislation for workers who work inside the buildings, not just those that build the buildings. We were able to pass campaign finance reform, lobbyist disclosure, ending of no-bid contracts. And we did it because we had a majority now on city council, even though we didn't have an administration that supported it. The Ravensall administration was much more conservative than council, but we were persistent and we had a grassroots lobby behind us in order to be able to win.
Yeah. You get elected.
I'm now in my second term, so it's now 2005, 2009. I'm at war with the Ravensall administration, it seems like almost every week. And I have to make a decision. 2009, I have to decide, I had already, after Bob died, there was a special election, and I withdrew out of that race. I was running the campaign, and I ended the campaign because there was no path to victory. Absolutely no path. That when we did our polling and then we did the research after and then we did another poll, there was no way to be able to beat Luke Ravensall. He was young. He seemed different than other candidates.
So you just took that as I'm going to step away.
I couldn't ask another person to write another check. I couldn't ask another person to put a yard sign up, let alone come down to the office and spend 3 hours making phone calls, knowing that at the end of the day, we're going to lose. And most likely, we're going to lose big. There was a common mantra that was, give the kid a chance. And what I was cast at, coming out of 2005 as a almost white knight, I was now being cast as the villain.
For what particular reason?
Because I was running against him.
Well,
his popularity was off the charts.
Let's just say for people that aren't from Pittsburgh, what made you that? What turned you into that? Aside from him being...
No, it's simply my running against him. All the issues that I had fought for on council, he had voted against. Yet he was looked at as a progressive and young because he was different. And that profile of being the youngest mayor in America in a city that was old and still in the throes of the recession
No.
was an appeal that went beyond, but look at the vote on prevailing wage. It didn't resonate. People just wanted to be with something that they associated. And I was looked at, even though 2001, I was the youngest member of council, as being part of the establishment, something that would come back again later in my career.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
So now we're at 2009, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I have three options. I run again for city council, and 2013 then becomes I either leave or I run for mayor. I run for mayor because the election for mayor was only 2 years, finishing the term of Bob O'Connor.
Yeah.
So I give up my council seat, and I just go straight out and put everything in it. And one more time.
Now, do you have to give up your council
No,
seat?
but
You did that
I
to
did that
focus.
once,
Okay.
and people supported it.
All right.
I wasn't going to ask them to do it again. That would have been greedy. That would have been flying too close to the sun.
All right.
So, or I run away and just say, you're all crazy, and I'm done with this, and I'm going to go make some money again.
Yeah.
So I ended up traveling to sort of clear my head. And my head was pretty jumbled at that point in life again. Bad relationship, a whole bunch of other stuff that was going on. So I went to Turkey on an interfaith peace mission between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And I remember I was in Ephesus, and it's the place where it is believed, it's the place where John took Mary.
Yeah.
When Christ was on the cross and he said, "Mother, meet your son."
Yeah.
And they went there, and they're like letters to John to the Ephesians and that stuff. And I'm at the spot where it's believed where Mary lived and died. And we are in a battle downtown over a billboard, an electronic billboard by a company called Lamar. And it is just eating me away, keeping me up at night, everything else.
What is the battle about? Because Lamar's everywhere.
You're not allowed to have electronic billboards downtown. This was put up without a bid, without a contract, without
So this
the administration just gave
yeah.
a Pittsburgh parking garage to friends to put up a billboard that they're going to now make millions and millions off of public property, which isn't even permitted by zoning to be there to begin with. And
Is this the one by the Grant building?
Yes.
Okay.
Not that one. The one down at the end of Grant, at the Pittsburgh parking garage down by the train station.
Okay.
There used to be a big that just put it up without, they got the permits. That was the thing. But anyways, going back to it, I'm standing there and I'm thinking, growing up as a kid, my mom taught me the history of Mary. She taught me about how she went to heaven. And I'm standing at the place that supposedly happened right here.
Yeah.
And I picked up a cell phone and I called my mom, and I'm there like, yeah, you know how you told me about, yeah, I'm standing here. No, I am at the spot right now, and I'm breaking off a little branch of a tree for you, and I'm going to bring it home. That little branch of that tree sat in my mother's living room till the day she died. And I thought, how small is that billboard back on Grant Street in Pittsburgh? And why is it owning me?
Yeah.
I then took another a fellowship opportunity with the Rotary later that year, and I went to Norway for 30 days, and I lived with families along the western coast, and I studied energy policy. Norway is the leading producer of gas and oil of all of Europe, but it is planning a 30-year transition to break away from all of it and to be the leader in renewables. And I met with professors and executives from the fossil fuel industries. I went to top of mountains where water turbines started until they hit the sea. I spent those 30 days just getting a bigger perspective than how my life seemed at the time that was so focused inward.
Yeah.
And I decided I'm going to run for council one more time. And I'm going to work very hard on passing a lot of legislation to start to make this city different. And I'll decide in 2013 whether or not I'll run for mayor.
All right.
So 2009, that coalition that we built becomes a group called Pittsburgh United. With it, we were able to build out a progressive policy agenda around each of the different organizations and what their critical needs are. And we find allies on council to help sponsor the different bills. And we win. And we pass some of the most progressive legislation in the country. And it's happening right here in Pittsburgh, where 10 years ago, when I first got on council, we had legislation to install art bike stops, bike racks within the city.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most divided issues because council argued that all that will do is have more and more people on bikes riding down the sidewalks, running into old people. And we couldn't even have something as easy as somebody donating to the city, giving us. And my argument back was we already have bike racks. They're called trees, and we're killing the trees. I mean, this isn't a hard vote. From that, just 7 years later, having a council that is supporting same-sex marriage, and being able to see that sea change happen in a very short period of time. 2013 comes, and I have a conversation with a county council member in 2011, and we meet at my watering hole, and it's Rich Fitzgerald, and he said, I want to run for county exec, and I want you to support me. And I said, Rich, I'm thinking about running in 2013, and I'd consider supporting you, but you got to understand, Rich at this point is the progressive candidate. They're basically saying he's too liberal to be able to run Allegheny County, and that he will never be elected because he's too liberal. And I simply said, I want a mirror. So if I endorse you, you endorse me. If I raise money for you, you raise money for me.
Yeah.
If I do a mailer for you, you do a mailer for me. If I get my volunteers to go out for you, you get your volunteers to go out for me. So all I'm asking is whatever I do, and this would help me make my decision about 2013.
Yeah.
And he said, I can't do that. And looking at him, surprised, because it wasn't like he had a lot of support at that point.
And just say, did he have any solid reason for that?
And I had a definite small army of people with me that can deliver. And he said, yeah, I'm not making any deals to win this race. And I appreciated it because I think I said the same thing back in 2001. And I know where that meant was if he wasn't making a deal with me, he wasn't going to make a deal with somebody else. And that somebody else may be somebody who I don't agree with.
Yeah.
And if I have a clean slate, I have an opportunity. And I said, let me think about it. And I called him either the next day or the day after that. And I said, of course, I'm going to support you. And, let's win this. And he was the underdog, and we won. 2012 in September, 8 months before the primary.
Yeah.
I announced that I'm going to run against Luke Ravenstahl for mayor in 2013. And standing next to me is the county executive, Rich Fitzgerald, with a check for $5,000 to max out his contribution, to put a message out there. We can do better. We're going to do better. And nobody has to worry about being pressured by city government in keeping the incumbent, because the county executive is already with the challenger. That was a sea change for me. Yeah. And that's something I never had in 2005 or 2007, was that type of backing. And that helped to open up doors for political support, for financial support, for everything else. And we went in and we were ready for war with Ravensthal. And this was, for as we looked at it, the soul of the city. And so I remember I was outside of the Graphic Artists Union up in Uptown, and we're listening to the radio, and the mayor's holding an emergency press conference. And I'm sitting with my staff member, and I'm saying, go in and tell them I have to hear what's going on. And just tell them that, you know, I'm not late, I'm outside, but I'll be in. And I was floored. And the mayor announces, like I had to do in 2007, I am not going to run in this election.
Oh.
And he pulls out of the race. There were rumors of multiple grand juries. There was definitely some involvement with FBI investigations that were going on.
No, I didn't know about any of this.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, the incumbent mayor is out of the race.
Okay.
That day, for the next 5 days, my phone never stopped ringing with all the former friends of mine who then all became the Ravensthal supporters, all saying, hey, Bill, you know we always supported you. We were with you at the beginning. And it seemed like all of a sudden now, for the first time, I was actually being viewed as the most likely. And then over the top rope comes Jack Wagner.
Yeah.
Former Auditor General of State of Pennsylvania, former president of city council, former state senator, former council member, Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart recipient. Somebody who himself ran as the reformer in the 80s under the mantra of stop the circus, and how he would clean up City Hall.
Yeah.
Is recruited by the people supporting Ravensthal to be the challenge. But there's a problem. Michael Lamb's still in the race. And Michael was in the race for one reason. Luke's numbers were low. He couldn't get, in our polling, beyond 32% of the vote. And his favorability was very low as well. If it was a head-on-head, I would crush him. If it was a three-way, it was going to be a battle. And having Lamb in the race would help to take away a lot of the vote that would have otherwise gone to me.
Yeah.
But now Michael is the problem, because what Jack needs is the head-on-head.
Mm-hmm.
In order to be able to win the South Hills and the North Side and be able to pull in areas of white middle class, it has to be a head-on-head race. So then Michael drops out, even though he's the Democratic Party nominee. And all of a sudden the Democratic Party doesn't have a nominee, and it's the two of us. And all things being Pittsburgh, in 1993, when I had that political consulting firm, I worked for Jack Wagner.
Mm.
So it's almost as if the circle came all the way around. But Pittsburgh is ready for something different. We got outspent so heavily in those last 2.5 months. Jack was up and beating us by almost 10 points, and we ended up winning the race by 13.
Oh, there you go. So where do you go from there?
From there, we decided that our administration would be different. From the very beginning, we created something called Talent City, which had never happened before. It was a opportunity for civic leaders to nominate to the mayor who all the directors and chiefs should be. Funded by the Heinz Endowments, we created community meetings where the public could speak in, and we opened up the process for anybody and anyone to apply for the jobs. So for planning director, we had people apply from as far as Abu Dhabi. Our director was hired from Seattle, where he was the planning director. Previous, he had been a planning director in Manhattan. Police chief came from Madison, Wisconsin. The new director of building inspection from Philadelphia. We created new departments like the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure and brought in leadership from Washington, D.C. And within each of these cases, we're not only hiring the best people, but we created the most diverse administration in the city's history by all different measurements of gender, race, background, orientation, education. It made it, in a way, proof that if you open up opportunity based upon simply talent, diversity will automatically be a part of your end result.
Yeah, I mean, that completely makes sense. I know we're kind of running out of time here, and this is a very unconventional interview because it's usually, but at the end of the show, we usually do some fun questions just to keep it light.
Yep.
I got like 20 here, but I know you're running late already. Let's just go with just some easy stuff.
Okay.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
People that don't wave to me after I allow them to make the Pittsburgh left.
There we go. Do you have a sleep routine?
Yes, it's horrible.
All right, I'll take that as an answer. What type of music do you like and why?
I like roots music, so it varies to anything from bluegrass to blues to reggae to basically any type of music that goes back to its soul.
Yeah, I like that. There was a good jazz show last night downtown. Let's see. What's the best advice you ever got?
Take a breath. It was one of the only things that my dad ever gave me as advice. He gave me that, and never borrow another man's gun, another man's horse, or another man's woman.
That's solid advice right there, I'd say. Childhood hero.
Willie Stargell.
All right. If someone gave you $1,000 when you were 18, what would you have done with it?
Spent 150 of it on an acoustic guitar and banked the other 850, or else my parents would have disowned me.
No, that's very good. What would you do with it now? Someone gave you $1,000.
Pay off debt, because I don't carry debt, so I'm still very fiscally minded. And I think it comes from a mother who was very much affected by the Great Depression.
All right. What's the one thing you'd change about yourself?
My weight.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Living between my home in the east end of Pittsburgh and spending the other half of my week in the Laurel Highlands, working at an institute that I have worked to create at Carnegie Mellon University on the P4 principles that we established, and hopefully still with my pup.
All right. We'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go through all of them.
No,
If we're doing part 2, we'll do
Yeah.
the rest later. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah,